Well, obviously, throughout the interview, we've been alluding to the contentious election cycle we're leading up to right now. It's a very difficult time for churches. We have many churches that aren't even open, or they're open at a very minimal capacity. We have a number of churches, especially in California, who are fighting and taking legal action to stay open and be open without masking. Um, Mario, if I were to say to you, whether we're saying this is an apostolic call, a prophetic call to leaders and influencers right now, how would you call us to be bold and to take action? I feel like we're at this kind of starting line where we can either choose to sit behind the starting line and just do nothing and be scared, or we can let the gun go off and enter the race. It's going to cost us something. We might have legal problems. We might have people who disagree with us and don't like us and hate on us. But I feel like we're at this critical time where either we're going to lead or we're not. So what would be your call to leaders and influencers right now? How should we stand up and maybe do differently from what we've been doing the last few months?
Well, you know what? I'm really glad you asked me that. And I want to just zero in on something. We got to kill some sacred cows because they make the most delicious hamburgers. The first sacred cow is, if we oppose government, we're going to be a bad witness to America. Well, that's false. Absolutely false. We couldn't be a better witness than to oppose evil. We cannot allow how it looks to the casual observer, our opposition to evil. Second is, we got to be convinced. I was reading a verse the other day and it said, some people, Paul said, don't want to eat meat. And then he said, but let everyone be firmly convinced in their mind. Now, I'm a preacher, but I can tell you what makes bad preaching. I know why every preacher that's listening, why you're not being effective. I'll nail it in 6 notes. I'll name it. You're not convinced. And see, when you're not convinced, you can't be convincing, which is the object of preaching. The most desperate need of this hour is not entertaining preaching. It's not likable preaching. It's convincing the audience. And the American Revolution is proof that you rebel against government. It's proof. These preachers say, oh, we shouldn't ever rebel against government. I look at them and say, we wouldn't have America. America wouldn't exist. And the driving force behind the American Revolution were preachers who one day woke up to the natural extension of their Christianity, that tyranny should be opposed in whatever form it is. We can't condemn our soldiers that defeated Nazism. We can't condemn those Americans throughout history that fought to get rid of slavery. So we can't hide behind this mystical theology that we don't have a place at the table. We gotta not worry about our look, because the people who will be offended by freedom fighters aren't people that we can ever win to Christ anyway, because their thinking is evil. And you can't win a soul without telling them they're wrong. You do it in love, you do it in wisdom, but you got to tell them they're wrong. I never could stand before a gang member and say, you got to get out of your gang, you got to get off drugs, you got to quit putting needles in your arm. Well, that same thing applies today. We're at a moment where we're in an election that is a no-brainer. And any Christian that is confused about what their duty is and who to vote for is actually parsing words. They're disingenuous and they're not facing facts. And they need to hear what Dietrich Bonhoeffer said. He said, to be silent is to speak. Not to act is to act. And at this point, it isn't what Trump is saying. It isn't. I look at Trump and I go, okay, I know why he offends you. You never met anybody from New York City before. But I want to explain to you, look at the other side, what they espouse, what their intentions are, what they're allowing. I mean, Antifa at Black Lives Matter, they are the armed militia of the Democrat Party now. And a lot of people say, oh my God, I can't believe that man of God said that. It's the truth. And history will bear me out. So this is why Christians need to understand that God is going to tell them to open their church. And I have one more thing to say. Am I okay, Shaun?
Yep, keep going. This is fantastic.
All right. Luke chapter 6. Excuse me, Luke chapter 5. Although Luke chapter 6 is very good. Luke chapter 5 tells the story of Jesus. And it explains why I'm opening up my tent in Fresno, even though technically I'm not allowed to. I'm still going to do it. Here's what Luke 5 tells us. A man full of leprosy, it says. Think about that. It didn't say he had leprosy. It said he was full of leprosy. So 20 feet away, you would know he was a leper. He fell at the feet of Jesus. He broke the law by doing that. Lepers were not allowed to approach anybody. They were unclean, and they had to keep their distance. They had to be shunned. This man, so desperate that he broke Levitical law by coming within the violating social distance law in order to fall at the feet of Christ to ask for a miracle. And that's found in Leviticus chapter 5, those laws. Now the Bible says, if you will, you can heal me. Jesus looked at the man and said, I will. Now, Shaun, remember that when the centurion's servant was sick, he got a note from the man saying, you don't have to come to my house. You just speak the word. Jesus could have healed that leper from 100 yards away by whispering that it was gone. But the Bible says he put his hand on him. Now Christ broke the law. Now here's the interesting thing. Immediately the man is cleansed. And Jesus gives him 2 commands. Don't tell anybody. Imagine how you're going to do that one. Your skin has changed. Everybody knows you were full of leprosy. And now you've got this beautiful complexion. And so they say, what? And you go, I can't tell you. I just don't. I think that was a technique that is marvelous. It's wisdom from beyond this world. And the second is, go to the priest and show yourself. Now, why did Jesus break one Jewish law and forcefully obey another? Because of 1 Samuel 10, verse 6. Do what the occasion demands. This is the ox in the ditch on the Sabbath day. And what I'm laying in my bed, and the voices of the addicts and the homeless and the lost in Fresno began to haunt me. And here's the voice I heard. If you want to, you could help us. If you want to, you could help us. And in that moment, when Jesus stood there and that man said that about him, Jesus said, more than this particular statute, I want you to be healed. How much more then should we disregard a stupid, this is not a pandemic we're in. We're going to get in trouble. YouTube is going to harass you for this. But when you have in a city of over almost 2 million people, where less than 200 people have died from the coronavirus, that is not a pandemic. I don't know, you do the math. It is not a pandemic. Is it terrible? Of course it is. But to shut down all the churches because of that, there is no justification. And any pastor who goes to prayer is going to hear the voice of the fact that right now in the state of Florida, Shaun, we had more people die from overdose of drugs because of lockdowns than have died from the coronavirus. And that is amplified in California where the suicide rate of California has broken every single record. We do have a pandemic in California, but it's not coronavirus, it's suicide. And the church being shut down is a major factor in that. Isolation. So we're going to put up our tent. We're going to invite everyone. We've printed 30,000 invitations to the city of Fresno. And we tell them straight up, come and be healed. Come and receive the power of God. And someone said, well, Mario, you could go to jail. I'll tell you what, I would rather sit behind bars than to sit at home with a false, self-righteous spirit that says, oh, I'm doing the right thing. Now God is speaking to other people. I don't want anyone to open a church unless God tells them to. But I don't want anyone to keep a church closed unless God tells them to.